Good evening and welcome to the Monday night, oh, I'm sorry, the Friday night special edition, this 1 hour special edition of the People Show with yours truly, Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator. I am glad to be here with you another evening on this August the 30th. So much has happened during this time. We're going to do a little history, remembering of things that occurred. And of course, um, on 2 days ago, August the 28th, 61 years ago, was the day that Martin Luther King in SCLC and thousands and thousands upon thousands of people from around the country, black, white, Jewish, Christian, Muslims, of every ethnic group converged on the Capitol out in the mall to listen to what would become one of the most iconic days and speeches in the history of the world. Martin Luther King was there, and Ralph Abernathy was there, and Mahalia Jackson was there, Harry Belafonte was there, and a whole bunch of other people were there in the name of equity and justice. So many people have paid the price for you and I to have the opportunities and the privileges that we have to participate in making our democratic process and our democratic system better. It was Fannie Lou Hamer who began her civil rights activism in 1962, continuing until her health declined 9 years later. She was known for her use of spiritual hymnals and quotes and her resilience in leading the civil rights movement for black women in Mississippi. She was exhorted, threatened, harassed, shot at, and assaulted by racists, including members of the police, while trying to register for and exercise her right to vote. She later helped to encourage thousands of African Americans in Mississippi to become registered voters and to help hundreds of disenfranchised people in her area through her work and programs like the Freedom Farm Cooperative. She unsuccessfully ran for the United States Senate in 1964 and in the Mississippi State Senate in 1971. In 1970, she led the legal action against the government of Sunflower County, Mississippi, for continued illegal segregation. This was a woman who had no education, grew up on a plantation, lived on a plantation most of her life, and she fought with all that she knew, all that she had. Someone who was beat, abused, in jail, just for wanting to be a first class citizen and exercise her constitutional right to register and vote. Tonight, I want to talk to those of you who will pay attention, those of you who will share this with others, those who think that the extremists of the MAGA movement and Donald Trump and those on the Republican side are an alternative for black folks. I'm here to tell you tonight they are not an alternative for the advancement of black people. Whatever your frustrations are, your frustration should be fueled by information so that you could understand where it is that you need to fight and where it is that you need to challenge those who are in representative office. However, If you put the wrong people in office, you won't have anybody that you will be able to challenge. If you put the wrong people in office, because they're not going to listen to you, because they are not interested in solving problems for the average person in America. Those people who are tied into this sycophant type relationship with people like Donald Trump and the people who support his efforts. I'm calling them and separating them from the true Republicans who really want and have their philosophical differences, but they want for our democracy to be in place, and they want for us to have the opportunity to have discussion of ideas, to have debates about policy, and to have deliberate solutions for advancing and moving the country forward. We have people on the Democratic side, in the Democratic Party, that we elect to go to public office so that we can challenge those people to advance the agendas that are beneficial to our communities. You won't have that if you don't understand what is actually happening. Because you're frustrated, because you don't, you're not happy with the representation that we've had or that you have, the way to do that is for us to organize ourselves so that we can do that. And I'm going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to talk about the responsibility of us as citizens, what we must do. But I want you to watch this clip because you probably have not seen it. Some of you have not seen it, or some of you have not seen it for a while. But I want to show you the difference between people who have actually sacrificed their lives for us to have this sacred opportunity to participate in democracy, in the democratic process. And these were not people who were educated people. These were people who had character, courage, and conscience. I want you to listen to the testimony of Fannie Lou Hamer when she testified before the Credentials Committee. And at the very same time that she testified, the President of the United States got word of it, and then Baines Johnson got word of it, and did not want for this to go forth, did not want for it to go forth. And so he went on to do and have a, to speak from the Oval Office. And because they did not want for her speech to go live. But what they did was, it happened in reverse. What happened in reverse is because he soaked up all of the television time. Every news outlet in America ran Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony. And this is Fannie Lou Hamer, a sharecropper, someone who lived on a plantation. Listen to this woman articulate before the committee.
Want me to stand? Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stinnett. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, "Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we're not ready for that in Mississippi." And I addressed him and told him, said, "I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself." I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Roosevelt, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom, and 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out.
I'm not sure what happened here. Let me see if I can bring that back up.
Want me to stand? Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, And Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that, said, if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said, then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we're not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him, said, I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Rooseville, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. And June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom, and 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out.
All right, that's the first part of the clip. I'm not sure we're having some technical issues with the rest of it. I'm going to bring that to you a little bit later on. I might not be able to get it to you tonight, but that was in 1962. Fannie Lou Hamer is recounting what took place there. This woman was jailed. She was put into jail with other people, and she was beaten, ordered to be beaten by the sheriffs by 2 black prisoners. And those black prisoners were threatened that if they did not beat Fannie Lou Hamer, that same thing would happen to them. Now, here is a woman who was putting herself on the front line for us, and there were 2 black men who were ordered by white racist jailers to beat this black woman, and they had to beat them until they were exhausted. And when one was exhausted, they brought in another to do to continue the beating. Fannie Lou Hamer went on to lead successful efforts. She tried to run for public office, tried to run for the United States Senate, which was unsuccessful, and also tried to run for the state Senate. But Fannie Lou Hamer will go down in history, certainly as one of those, it is in the annals of history, but one of those who, if you don't know about her, you should know about her. You should learn about her. And we should operate with that kind of courage, because we're not facing the kinds of threats that she faced. Although we are facing threats, there are people who don't want you to participate in the democratic process, and they're not Democrats. They are not from the Democratic Party. There are people from the so-called conservative movement. The founder of the conservative movement, Paul Weyrich, who was the founder of the conservative movement, made these statements in 19 1980 about who or how many people should participate in voting. And if you think that he's talking about anybody other than black folks or people on the Democratic side, you're sadly mistaken. Take a look at this is what they're trying to put into play right now as we speak.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Win is Republicans win when fewer people can vote. Let's look at what they're doing in Florida. In Florida, they passed a law. Restoring, I think it was in 2018 or 2019, restoring 1.4 million people who had been incarcerated, who had served their time, and they were restored their rights to vote. And then this current governor and the Republican legislature put into place a policy that would take away those 1.4 million people, so that if they had not paid all of their restitution, or if they had not completed their probation or their parole, then they did not fully complete their sentence. Always moving the ball, always trying to make it more difficult for people to register and vote. By the way, if you want to make sure that your voter registration is current, please make sure that you go to iwillvote.com in whatever state that you're in. Check your voter registration to make sure that your voter registration is current. If it is not, go to your local registrar and get registered to vote so that you can cast your vote in this upcoming election. It is not Democrats that are trying to make it harder to vote. It is Republicans. And why are Republicans making it harder to vote? Because Republicans know that the greater the turnout, the less likely they are to win. You just heard Paul Wayward, who was the founder of the conservative movement in the fall of 1980, making those statements. When Ronald Reagan became the president of the United States, he was the chairman of the Ronald Reagan campaign. So for all of those of you who believe that the Republicans, in particular the MAGA extremist and Donald Trump, is someone who is looking out for you, I'm not sure how you could be so misled, misinformed, or confused to think that that person who cannot identify with your plight whatsoever, who cares not about your plight whatsoever, cares not about resolving problems, who did absolutely nothing, passed not a single piece of legislation to resolve problems or to advance the average working person in this country. He did give a rocket $2 trillion tax cut to the richest 1% in the country. He did do that. And for those of you who want to say that what about the First Step Act? Well, let's talk about the First Step Act. The First Step Act, which was a bipartisan bill to try and curb recidivism in the prison system, and they were supposed to be given $75 billion to help those who were coming out to become reintegrated into society with job training, job placement, the um, mental health counseling that they need. Donald Trump's administration, the very next year, starved that program and did not fund more than $14 million in the budget for that program. He only uses these type of programs to make himself appear that he is for the underdog, while in fact he is not. The other thing that he did, you like to tout the HBCUs that Donald Trump funded $250 million to HBCUs. Well, in fact, it was not $250 million. It was $250 million that went to HBCUs and other minority colleges. If you, HSI, which is a Hispanic serving institution, if you as an institution have 25% enrollment in your institution, whether it's Harvard, Princeton, Texas A&M, Florida State, any of those, Penn State, any of those colleges, if you have 25% enrollment of Hispanic students, you qualify to get those funds. Only about $90 million of those funds went to HBCUs. HBCUs, bipartisan, they have been invested in since 1965. This administration, the Biden-Harris administration, have invested into HBCUs $16.5 billion in these 4 years. $16.5 billion. That is more than all of the other presidents that were presidents combined going back to 1965. How did that happen? Kamala Harris, the vice president, who is the president of the Senate, had to vote some 33 times to break the tie because Republicans voted against these policies and Democrats voted for it. But it was a tie, so the tie-breaking vote had to be cast by who? The president of the Senate. The president of the Senate was Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris cast 33 tie-breaking votes, more than any other president of the Senate in the history of the presidency. As a result of doing that, Kamala Harris made sure that bills proposed, policies proposed by the Biden-Harris administration, passed in the House, that was controlled by the Democrats, came to the Senate, and as a result of coming to the Senate, she cast those tie-breaking votes. Now look, Kamala Harris, when she was a senator, wrote a policy or co-sponsored the policy or the bill of student loan debt forgiveness. The bill passed, and in the bill, she targeted HBCUs, students. It was challenged in the federal courts, and the federal courts overruled it and blocked it because the federal court said that you cannot have a race-based policy. So it was blocked. Kamala Harris learned from that. Kamala Harris, the vice president, and now the president of the Senate, made sure that in the executive orders that President Biden signed, that the language of those executive orders, in that language, that it included Pell Grants. Why did she do that? Because 77% or something of that number, could be more. 77% of all black students going to college have to use or apply for Pell Grants to get their student loans. And as a result of that being a part of that policy, black students disproportionately benefited from the already $170 billion of student loan reduction that the president and Vice President Kamala Harris has already signed into law. Vice President Kamala Harris, for those who say that, well, what has she done, or asking what she's done, I know that you don't like to do the work of digging and researching and pulling it up. Perfectly okay, because you have families, you have children, you have a job that you have to go to, and you don't have that much time, or you just don't have the interest in doing so. I happen to be a political junkie, but I also have a podcast, and I have a responsibility to make sure that we put out information that you may not have. And I put out information that is factual information that you can go and check. By the way, if you'd like to call and you'd like to chat with me, you can call 951-221-8221, 951-221-8221, and I will be picking up your phone calls in just a few minutes. But I just want to get to this, and lost my place here. I want to get to this so that that you can see what's at stake. All right, for those people again who want to say that Kamala Harris hasn't done anything for us. What has she done for us? What has she done for black people? Right? All of this that they say, okay? But she has done quite a bit. All right? She's done quite a bit. So let's take a look at this. Here is some of the things that we're talking about. Some of the things they're talking about. They have gained historic economic recovery by creating more than 3 million jobs. That number is probably past 3 million jobs for black workers, and achieved the lowest black unemployment in history. The lowest black unemployment under this president and vice president in history. Help black working families build wealth. Black wealth is up some 60% relative to pre-pandemic. Cut in half the number of black children living in poverty in 2021 through the American Rescue Plan, again, which is that Kamala Harris has had to cast the tie-breaking vote to pass. The child tax credit expansion, which it expired and the Republicans did not support it, and it did not get extended. And Kamala Harris is proposing to make the child tax credit permanent, which helped many of black families. You're talking about $6,000 per child per year. That was able to lift half of the children that were living in poverty out of poverty in 2021. And Republicans thought it was a bad idea to get people out of poverty. They thought it was a bad idea, so they didn't support it. These are the people that you want to vote for. Donald Trump, you want to vote for him. The number of black people that are serving in cabinet positions, more black people are serving in cabinet positions under this administration than any other administration ever, Republican or Democrat. And what that means is, that means that those cabinet heads are heading up agencies like housing, like the SBA, and other areas that send resources to our states for our communities. If Donald Trump became the president, there would not be a black person that would be in any one of his cabinet positions that supported anything progressive or that supports poor people. He'll have people like Tim Scott that represent largely rural white districts, conservative districts. So all of these gains, all of these policies that are being passed or have been passed by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be reversed. Let's take federal contracts. The federal government spends about $600 billion a year in federal contracts, and hiring and appropriation and hiring private firms and private businesses to handle these contracts. Under the Trump administration, what Trump's administration did was they bundled the $600 billion in federal contracts, which means that small companies had no capacity to bid on these gigantual, these large bundle contracts. So it could only be companies that had the capacity. And those companies were not required to hire or to do joint ventures or to sub businesses to, or portions of those businesses to black businesses, because black businesses were locked out. They didn't have the capacity, so they could not bid on those contracts. The Biden-Harris administration unbundled the $600 billion in federal contracts so that smaller companies that had smaller capacity had opportunity. And as a result of unbundling those contracts, $69 billion of those contracts, black firms are now getting $69 billion. You ask the question, what is Kamala Harris doing for the black community? These are things that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are doing for the advancement of our black communities. Now, I am not saying that we don't need to push. You always need to push. You always need to ask questions. But what we also need to do is to organize ourselves in the fashion in terms of numbers as a block of registered voters that we could go to our local and state representatives and challenge them to do more on the issues that are facing our communities. like making sure that we have state-of-the-art public schools everywhere that we live, that our public schools are well equipped, well resourced, and that teachers are well paid and well resourced so that they don't have to worry about how they're going to take care of their very basic needs. And I believe that a teacher certainly should be getting paid the equivalent, if not more, than any other civil servant working or public job, whether it's a fireman, whether it's a police, whatever. Teachers should not be making anything less than $100,000 a year, not less than $100,000 a year. In our public schools, we should be making sure that we are attracting people who, and especially those people who love the idea, who love teaching, but they may not be a school teacher because they do have to be able to provide for themselves and their families. Teachers should not have that worry. They ought not have that worry. So, I want to show you some clips. I want to show you some clips from Project 2025, some of the handlers. Now we find that even though Donald Trump says he doesn't know anything about Project 2025 and he says that some of these ideas are extreme, well, let's take a look. Project 2025 and its co-sponsors and co-founders, co-authors, over 100 of the contributors to Project 2025, we now have discovered that over 100 of the authors or the co-authors are people who served in the Donald Trump administration from 2016 to 20. Over 100 of the co-authors. Now, there was an interview that was given by Russ Vought, who worked in Donald Trump's administration. And he thought that he was going to meet with people who were wealthy Republican donors. And in this meeting, he tells his thoughts about Project 2025 and what their goals are about Project 2025. And he talks about Donald Trump knowing about or distancing himself from saying that he knows anything about Project 2025. Well, this was an undercover investigation by a reporter and an actor that were talking to Russell Vought, who is one of the lead authors of Project 2025. Take a look.
This year has been predominantly now getting ready for a year 5 of a Trump administration. We have about 350 different documents that are regulations and things of that nature.
That's him talking about year 5. So this is year 5 going into 2025 of the Donald Trump administration. So they plan on continuing and putting on steroids the ideas that they have and using the lessons that they have learned from the time that they were in office in 2016, and all of these years, these 4 years, organizing themselves to make sure that they will be able to advance those ideas should they get reelected into public office. Now, here's his his comments about Donald Trump and protecting Donald Trump and saying what the plan is for distancing himself from Project
Notwithstanding,
2025.
I expect you to hear 10 more times from the rally the president, distancing himself from the left's boogeyman of Project 2025.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're not worried about that?
I'm not worried about it. And so I see what he's doing is just very, very conscious distancing himself from a brand. He's very supportive of what we do, and know that we have all manner of things that we do that's, even unrelated to Project 2025.
Sure.
So there he tells you, or he's explaining what Donald Trump's role is on the campaign, and he calls Project 2025 the left's boogeyman. It's not the left's boogeyman. It's their boogeyman. They're the ones who wrote it on this 922-page manifesto. They're the ones who put this on paper. And they're now going around trying to get money so that they can advance their agenda and their ideology on anybody. It just to talk about how extreme they are. This is a man who says that he does not want there to be any exceptions whatsoever. Not any, zero exceptions for a woman to have access to reproductive care if she's been raped or incest. He does not want there to have any exceptions whatsoever. This is who some of you who say that you're going, and listen, every single person, even though we know that the vast majority of people, and I'll go through some of the analysis, not the polls, but some of the analysis that came out of Pew Research that talked about how Kamala Harris has gotten a 20-point swing in terms of support from certain demographics and that sort of thing. We'll talk about that. But to me, every single vote, and certainly to you, every single vote is important. And we have to talk about the issues, and we have to talk about not the personality or even not the candidate, but we have to talk about the issues that impact the people who are frustrated, who think that this is a good idea to support a person who doesn't even care about them, who doesn't care about their issues. Candace Owens and people like Candace Owens, those are not people who speak for the average black person. They're really speaking for themselves, largely out of ignorance and misinformation. And because there's some Republican donor that funds them to be one of their mascots. Pretty much. Take a look at Vote's position on a woman's right to reproductive care. Now look, whatever your position is on anything, whatever your moral position is, you do not have a moral right to dictate to anyone, particularly a woman and her doctor, to dictate what they decide for their reproductive health. You can't moralize on somebody. It doesn't make you some holy, righteous person to be moralizing on somebody. Period. And there's nowhere in Scripture that gives you that license. Nowhere in these pages of Scripture. See these pages of Scripture? I don't want to hold it upside down like Trump did. Right? Nowhere does it give you that license? And it doesn't make you out of line with God because you say to a person you have a right to decide on what happens with your body with your doctors. The government, nor you or me, should be in a doctor's office with a woman making decisions or having any type of influence about her health. It's none of your business, period. If you don't like abortions, my favorite response to that, don't have one. Don't have one. And then you won't be supporting something that you say you don't support. Just don't have one. Here is Russell Vought's position.
He talks about rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I don't actually believe in those exceptions. I want to get to abolition, but we got to win elections. And so I want to get as far as we possibly can.
This man says that he does not believe in any exception, so that he wants to dictate. They want to dictate to women what their reproductive health will be. But somebody wants to, just to literally think about that. Just think about that somebody wants to tell you on what type of medical treatment that you can get, whether it saves your life, protects your life, furthers your life. They want to have a part in that. That sounds ridiculous just when you hear it, when it is said. This is what the guy said about people who are coming to America, or people who want to migrate to America, that they must adopt Christian nationalism.
So I want to make sure that we can say we're a Christian nation, and my viewpoint is mostly that I would probably be Christian nationism. That's pretty close to Christian nationalism. Can we, if we're going to have legal immigration, can we get people that actually believe in Christianity? Is that something, or do we have to have, are we not allowed to ask questions about Sharia law?
So now you want to force people. First of all, we're not a Christian nation. We never have been. We are a secular nation. We are not a Christian nation. If you decide to be a Christian, I'm a Christian. You decide to be a Muslim, you're a Muslim. You're Jewish, you're Jewish. You're Hindu, you're Hindu. Whatever, Buddhist, whatever your faith commitment, you have a right to that. It's not a litmus test, some sort of faith litmus test that they're telling you that this is what these people want to do. These people don't want to govern. They want to control your life. They want to enslave your life. And you all are walking around confused that these people actually want to solve problems. They do not. They're not even interested in having a debate or discussion with you about solving problems in the Black community, about solving the problems of illegal guns flooding into our communities. But they like to use, in their very arrogant ways, or to try to promote their ideology, like to use cities like where we are in Chicago, because there's a lot of Black folks here. It's their code word so they don't have to say it. Or places like Atlanta or places like Detroit, or places like Philadelphia. And here in Chicago, where you're not even allowed to buy or sell guns in Chicago, yet people are flooding illegal guns into our communities from other states because we don't have a federal policy on gun reform. So you have these people who have these really altered, high-powered, altered assault weapons that are being used in our communities, and there is not a single black person in the world, not just in the country, in the world, that manufactures, distributes guns, bullets, whatsoever on the planet. But they end up in our community illegally, flood our communities like you would not believe. And there's nobody doing anything about that. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but certainly Republicans don't want to do anything about having real gun reform. They like the idea because they think that if they can reduce or allow for the populace in our communities to reduce, that they can advance their communities, and maybe this is a way that they can win elections. Well, that's just an opinion. It's not a fact, it's an opinion. But my point to you is, please do not be confused that thinking Republicans are the alternative for us. They are not. And certainly not these Republicans, not these extremists. Not speaking or saying that all Republicans, because there are reasonable Republicans who want to see our democracy protected, who want to see that we have a platform for which those of us and our differences, we can sit down and discuss, debate, deliberate, and deliver solutions to real problems that we're having in this country. And for these people who have platforms on the radio and in other spaces, who so ignorantly tout Donald Trump, because anybody who is touting Donald Trump is either doing it willfully or ignorant of what the facts are. Anybody who is doing that, because there's not a single policy, not one. And I challenge you again, bring me a policy that the Republicans or Donald Trump and the MAGAs have proposed in the past 50 years and past that help the average working person or the average black person in this country. One. You don't have to bring two. One. I've been asking that and challenging those who think that the alternative is for us. I've been challenging them on that for years. They have not been able to deliver it. All they can do is just call names and disparage people, but they can't have an intelligent, substantive conversation about what the people who they say are better for us have done. Not one in 50 years. And I'm only going back 50 years because I can go back further, but in 50 years, not one, not a single one. All right, listen, that's going to do it for me tonight. I just wanted to come on and discuss that with you. I'm going to continue to do this all the way through the election. I hope that you will have your other people in your social network that will join us to be informed and educated so that we can talk to people, provide people with the information that they need to know so that they can make the right decision. So voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is voting for our communities. That's what you're voting for. Now, we're not voting for kings, not voting for a queen. We're not voting for somebody that we're putting on some sort of pedestal as being perfect, because there's no such thing. They are not perfect. We are not perfect. But what we have is we have a system for which we are able to engage that system to push agendas and issues forward for the benefit and the advancement of our people. Let us work together to do that. Remember, text 10X10 to the number 855-909-1385 and join the Independent Black Voting Bloc in order for us to put mass numbers together so that we can challenge our representatives, we can meet our representatives to put forth the kinds of policies, and they can take those policies to our local, to our state, and to the federal level to make sure that the President Kamala Harris and Vice President Tim Walz have to address. All right, that's going to do it for me for tonight. Listen, you all have a fantastic Labor Day weekend. But let me just say this before we go. Before we go, I know that we're going to be closing on Instagram. Look, some very important anniversaries. August 28th, Dr. King March on Washington. August 28th, 1961, Emmett Till is beaten, murdered in Mississippi. August 31st, 1962, Fannie Lou Hamer goes with 18 people, travel 26 miles to go to Indianola to register, to try and register the vote. Is thrown in jail, beaten, all for the purposes of voting. So there's some historical days in the month of August that we need to remember and reflect that all paid a price for you and I to participate in the democratic process. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you Monday night for the Monday night edition of The People Show.